Hey everyone! Tonight we're going to drift through the soothing, surprisingly fragrant world of ancient Persia, where beards were not just a symbol of masculinity, but a canvas of scent, style, and social power. You can picture it: a warm Persian evening, a faint desert breeze, and a man carefully perfuming his magnificent beard so that everyone within a few paces would notice his wealth, status, and quite simply, that he smelled spectacular. You might be thinking, why does this matter to me while I'm lying here trying to sleep? Well, let's be honest. If you had to navigate court politics, military campaigns, and the brutal dry air of the Iranian plateau without some well oiled facial hair, you might not have survived either. You probably wouldn't even last a day in that world. So before you get too cozy, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? Now turn off your lights, let the fan hum its quiet lullaby, and together, let's begin tonight's journey. You ease yourself down into a plush pillow as your mind crosses back through the centuries. The scene sharpens: a bustling Persian marketplace under the lazy gold of the setting sun. Copper lamps flicker in wooden stalls, catching the sheen of fine silk robes and mountains of bright saffron. The smell of roasting lamb and bitter herbs weaves through the air, mingling with the sharp tang of frankincense. There, a group of men gather around a perfumer's stand. You notice their beards, thick, styled, sculpted into shapes that would make a modern barber weep in envy. Each beard glimmer with hints of fragrant oil, a base of sesame, enriched with rosewater and blended with spices you might only dream of tasting. This was more than vanity, it was a language. To have a well scented beard in the Achaemenid Empire meant you had money, good standing, and probably the favor of a god or two. The Persians, you discover, were among the first to formalize beard oil recipes. A royal court record mentions a blend of cypress and myrtle oil, sometimes mixed with crushed pearls, yes, actual pearls, for their shine and supposed power to preserve youth. If you're wondering whether this was scientifically sound, well, let's just say the dermatologists of ancient Persia might have taken some creative liberties. But the effect was real. When a general rode into Persepolis with a scented, gleaming beard, people stepped back in awe. It was a performance, an announcement. You smelled your rank before you even spoke it. Some historians, however, still argue whether the pearl infused beard oils were truly widespread or more of a royal affectation. Archaeological digs have found residue in commoners' homes, but whether that was actual pearl or simply crushed limestone is amusingly still up for debate. As you settle deeper under your blanket, you might start to hear the gentle murmur of the marketplace. Someone barters over a bolt of brocade. Another man recites a poem about the sweetness of rose oil, promising it will give his beard the power to attract blessings from the divine. A third haggles for a bottle of civet musk, a truly potent fragrance that even today might knock you backward if you weren't prepared. And let's be fair, if you had to impress someone in a grand palace lined with glittering tiles, you'd probably want to smell as deliciously complex as humanly possible. That's one reason why Persian beard culture blossomed into an entire industry. One of the stranger details about these beard oils was the way they sometimes included ground up gold leaf. Gold was thought to transmit not just wealth, but spiritual purity, shimmering through the beard hair as a subtle reflection of the owner's soul. You might laugh at the idea of smearing your face with gold tonight, unless you have a really generous skincare budget, but the Persians saw it as a near sacred ritual. And here's a modern moment to consider. Can you imagine going to the drugstore today and picking up a beard oil infused with crushed pearls and gold leaf? Maybe you'd have to finance it with a small personal loan. Still, there's something romantic in their dedication to these perfumed masterpieces. It wasn't just about seduction, it was about identity, community, and a splash of confidence that wafted on the breeze. The next time you see an old Persian miniature painting with a perfectly coiffed gentleman, remember? That beard was carefully maintained, oiled with rare ingredients, and announced his status before he ever drew a sword or recited a line of poetry. Some scholars still puzzle over whether the men themselves did all the perfuming or whether servants handled the task. A few ancient texts hint that aristocratic men liked to do it themselves, a deeply personal moment of self presentation, while others think no noble would dare stain his hands with oil. The debate goes on, and for you, lying there, drifting slowly toward sleep, you might smell a hint of rose and myrtle in the air tonight, imagining that gentle breeze from a Persian courtyard. There's a quiet grace in how these men shaped their lives through scent, believing each drop of oil connected them to something eternal. And as the evening deepens, you let yourself wander through those tiled palaces, where even the quiet rustle of a robe through a doorway was scented with promise, hope, and a faint touch of mystery. You sink further into that sleepy haze, following the swirl of rose-scented oil through the flickering lamplight. As you wander the inner chambers of a Persian noble's home, you notice something else. The beard oils were stored in small clay flasks, carefully sealed to keep out the desert heat. These oils weren't cheap, and their owners treated them with the same reverence they might give a family heirloom. The jars were decorated with geometric patterns, a language of symbols that could show a man's tribe, his rank, or even a secret wish for protection. You might think your own aftershave bottle is fancy, but these flasks were works of art. Sometimes they included a tiny inscription, a short prayer, or a proverb about power and prosperity. And here's the factual twist. The oils weren't purely for pleasure. They were also practical. Persia was hot, dry, and dusty, and a perfumed conditioned beard helped lock in moisture and prevent sun damage to the skin beneath. Modern dermatologists might applaud that logic, though they'd probably skip the gold leaf. A strange, delightful side note. There are fragments of clay tablets describing beard oil recipes that included what seems to be ground pistachio shells. Historians aren't totally sure why, maybe for exfoliation, or just because pistachios were so prized that they thought, why not add them to everything? You know how trends go. You shift on your pillow, letting your body relax as the murmur of that Persian night thickens around you. You can almost feel the cool tile under your bare feet, hear the distant patter of water trickling through a courtyard fountain. One merchant boasts that his blend of lavender oil will keep the beard healthy enough to survive a month-long desert march. Another insists only a dash of saffron will guard you from evil spirits. And believe it or not, Scholars are still debating whether these scented beard treatments were reserved for holidays and celebrations, or if men used them every day. The surviving records are frustratingly vague, leaving historians to argue over broken pottery shards and faint inscriptions. Meanwhile, you can imagine the hush of the palace after dark. Shadows dance across painted walls, and a young prince sits before a polished bronze mirror, methodically combing oil through his beard. He repeats the motion like a prayer, trusting that tomorrow, when he rides to the court, no one will dare question his honor. It wasn't all show, though. Some of these oils included antibacterial herbs like thyme and oregano, which protected against infections. So while you're picturing sweet, romantic fragrances, remember there was also a gritty practicality behind them. After all, there were no modern antibiotics. You might even smile at the idea of a warrior carefully massaging thyme into his beard before heading out to a campaign, determined to smell good while conquering a rebellious province. Imagine if soldiers today had to do the same. And here's another curious piece of the puzzle: the role of perfumed beards in Persian diplomacy. When envoys came from faraway kingdoms, they would notice first of all the scent. An unperfumed beard could mean you were untrustworthy or disrespectful. A beautifully scented one, it meant you took pride in your appearance, in your culture, and in your status. There's still debate among academics about how often beards were perfumed for these political events. Some argue it was a rare ceremonial ritual. Others think Persian men would have been fragrant every single day. The evidence is patchy, but the truth is probably somewhere in between. As you keep breathing, slower now, you might find your mind catching on little details: the copper combs, warm in the morning sun, the hush of women preparing more oil in the back rooms, the bright blue tiles of a bathhouse where men shared beard grooming secrets. Even these bathhouses became sites of aromatic experiments where men tested new blends, compared notes, and maybe gossiped about who was using the fanciest saffron oil. One scribe from the later Sassanid period even joked in a poem that beard oils were more precious than the wife of your best friend. Harsh, maybe, but you can sense how deeply this practice shaped daily life. And lying there now, in your own bed, you might let the soft scent of rose, saffron, or even pistachio drift into your dreams, a symbol of an ancient world where fragrance and pride went hand in hand. Before your mind fades too far, you might hear a faint laugh from that bustling marketplace, or see a boy chasing a dog through an open courtyard, beard oil bottles clutched under his arm like stolen treasure. There, in that quiet moment, you realize how human they were, trying to impress, to stay healthy, to belong. Maybe you're not so different, really. You shift a bit on your pillow, your mind weaving in and out of the warm, resin scented night of ancient Persia. That vivid market scene softens into a more private, tranquil corner of a noble house. Here, the routine of beard care takes on a gentle, hypnotic rhythm. Oil warmed gently over a tiny flame, then combed slowly through each strand, each stroke a mark of patience and pride. As you move through this memory, you notice how the Persians tied their beard care to their sense of cosmic order. Zoroastrianism, the dominant faith of the empire, taught that purity and cleanliness connected a man to the light of Ahura Mazda. So that daily ritual of perfuming the beard wasn't only about beauty or status, it was a sacred act, one that balanced the chaos of the world with a whisper of harmony. You can almost sense the warmth of the oil on your own skin as you slip deeper into calm. A father teaches his son the art of the perfumed beard, explaining that it shows a man's character and strength. Each drop of rose, myrtle, or cypress oil carried meaning, like a silent prayer woven into hair. And yet, as historians love to argue, it's unclear how much these religious ideals really matched everyday practice. Were most men truly guided by purity, or were they just following a fashion trend that happened to smell amazing? Scholars still bicker about it, pointing to contradictory texts and hints buried in tax records. But you don't have to solve the mystery tonight. Just imagine the soft brush of a bronze comb passing over the jawline, taming the wild beard into something glorious, worthy of a general or a poet. One odd little footnote: some Persian men, especially soldiers, were known to hide tiny metal charms in their beards. These charms might hold protective spells designed to shield the wearer from evil spirits on campaign. If you think your keychain is quirky, remember these guys carried magic in their facial hair. In one palace account, a guard captain bragged that he had never lost a battle while wearing his charm laden beard, perfumed with lavender and thyme. Of course, whether that was the beard or pure luck, we'll never know. But who could resist a bit of magical thinking in such a dangerous world? You breathe a little deeper, your own room feeling cooler now, as if the desert night has followed you home. You imagine the tiled courtyards echoing with footsteps, the shimmer of lamps in the distance, and somewhere a young scribe crouched near a column, scribbling down beard oil recipes for future generations to cherish. There was real chemistry in those oils: antibacterial herbs, plant resins, waxes to shape the beard just so, even mineral powders that might have added a shimmering glow under torchlight. Persian science, although limited by what they knew, was surprisingly creative. Some men even applied clove or cardamom in the beard, hoping to disguise the harsh smells of battlefield sweat. And as you might guess, historians still argue about whether those strong spices worked or just made things worse. Maybe you smile, thinking about how someone thousands of years ago worried about the same thing you might: how to smell fresh in a hot climate, how to look respectable, how to hold on to a tiny scrap of dignity. As your breathing slows, you picture an elderly Persian noble leaning against a marble column, gently stroking his beard with pride. Around him, the perfume drifts into the night, carrying notes of rose and warm musk into the breeze. He's confident, serene, aware of the long line of ancestors who taught him that scent was a language, a silent call for respect. He glances up at the stars, sure that even the gods must appreciate a well perfumed beard. The scholars of today still haven't quite settled on the truth. Did these men oil their beards daily, or only for show? Were the rarest ingredients, pearls, gold, spices from India, truly common, or reserved for a tiny circle of elites? No one agrees, and maybe that's just fine. History leaves its gaps for you to dream into. So as you listen to the hush of your own room, let that question float gently around you, like the final note of rose oil on a summer breeze. Somewhere out there, a beard still waits to be perfumed, a ritual waiting to be repeated, an unbroken thread from a world long gone. And maybe, just maybe, you'll dream of it tonight. You sink even deeper under the covers now, the faint hum of your fan mixing with a faraway memory of a Persian court at dawn. As you gently cross into Act Two, the world opens wider. You find yourself standing on the white marble floors of Persepolis, where the royal processions moved through hallways lined with reliefs of dignitaries, each with a beard so beautifully carved you'd swear you could smell rose and cypress on the stone itself. These reliefs told a silent story: men of power, men of influence, men who carried their entire social worth woven into the oils on their faces. The sculptors were instructed to capture every curve of the beard, every twist, every symbol of perfection, because a man's beard was his honor. And in real life, the scents were even more elaborate. Historical records describe gatherings where Persian nobles would challenge each other, comparing fragrances like prized horses. If you've ever been to a wine tasting, imagine that, but for beard oil. They would say things like, "Mine carries the scent of 20 roses, crushed under the last full moon," or "My beard holds the secret of saffron from the farthest east." You can almost hear the laughter, the pride, the light-hearted boasts. It was competitive and playful, but also deadly serious. In a world where respect was currency, your beard could make or break you. Beneath all that grandeur, though, was a quieter reason for these rituals. Persia, with its vast empire stretching from the Mediterranean to the Indus, was a place of harsh climates. Perfumed oils protected the skin from brutal winds and relentless sun. Modern beard oils, if you've tried them, still work that same magic. Yet a strange custom pops up in some royal diaries. Men would test the strength of their perfumes by letting dogs sniff them. Apparently, if a dog recoiled, the scent was considered too fierce and unworthy of a Persian lord. Yes, a royal dog as an ancient fragrance critic. That's history for you. You rest easier, picturing those noblemen laughing as a spotted hunting dog turned up its nose at someone's overly spicy blend. Even thousands of years ago, people still needed a second opinion, and the debates rage on among scholars. Some believe these bearded nobles had personal perfumers whose sole job was to maintain that perfect aromatic balance. Others think the men took pride in crafting their own mixtures, a secret passed from father to son. There is no firm answer, and there may never be, but the mystery is part of what makes it so soothing to imagine. Your eyes grow heavy, traveling through a second scene, a bustling Persian bathhouse, steam swirling off enormous stone pools. There, men gather in a quiet rhythm, rinsing away sweat and dust, while servants bring out small bottles of beard oil. Lavender, thyme, and crushed myrtle swirl through the steam, wrapping around your senses until you can practically feel the warm water yourself. One older man explains to a young traveler that his beard oil has been blessed by a holy man and therefore will ward off sickness. Is that true? Hard to say, but in a world without modern medicine, a blessing and a good smell were worth clinging to. Some historians question whether those blessings were more about marketing than faith. If a seller could convince you that his rose-scented blend had the favor of Ahura Mazda, he might get a higher price. You know how sales pitches go. But to the men in that bathhouse, these things mattered. You feel their calm, the way they close their eyes as the oil is massaged into their beards, letting the scent drift through the steam like a silent prayer. There's something meditative in that, a small island of peace before returning to the crowded world outside. You shift slightly, cozy under your blanket, breathing in your own quiet air, and in that moment, you can share their hope that a drop of something fragrant might protect you, might give you courage, might bring a bit of gentle pride to an otherwise hard, uncertain life. No one really agrees on exactly what those ancient oils smelled like. Maybe the roses were stronger, the resins more bitter, the musk more overpowering than you'd ever dare wear today. Maybe your modern nose would flinch. But then again, it might also be hypnotic, a door to a forgotten garden of spices and flowers. And with that curious thought, you slip a little closer to sleep, hearing the water ripple, the brush of combs through thick black beards, and the laughter of men who for 1 hour could forget their battles and burdens. Their perfumes were armor, their rituals a shield, their fragrances a tiny rebellion against dust, disease, and death. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the scent of a beard still carries a kind of magic in the world. You ease deeper into the hush of your room, letting the fan's breeze blend with the whispers of an ancient world. The bathhouse fades, and you find yourself stepping into the sun-baked courtyard of a Persian military encampment. There, warriors sit polishing their weapons, and unbelievably, tending to their beards with the same devotion. You might chuckle a bit. After all, these men had to fight for their lives at sunrise, yet they still found time to massage rose oil into their beards. But it made sense. In a culture where scent signaled dignity and courage, showing up unperfumed was like showing up naked. One dusty scroll tells of a general who refused to address his troops until every officer had properly scented their beard. It sounds ridiculous, but this leader believed that only a man who honored himself through ritual could lead others into battle. And it worked, or so the scribes claimed. His army won, the men's morale high, the fragrance of lavender and civet musk drifting across the hot plain. Of course, scholars still argue about whether that account is exaggerated. Some say it's an invented legend to flatter the general's memory. Others believe the soldiers truly held perfumed ritual as sacred. There's no solid proof either way, and maybe that's what makes the image so dreamy. You're free to float between what was true and what was hoped for. As your mind wanders, you might imagine one warrior gripping a bronze mirror in one hand, a comb in the other, praying that tomorrow's sword would not find his neck. Each swipe of fragrant oil through the beard became a vow to survive, to go home, to live with an honor. And then there is the strange case of a beard recipe, unearthed on a clay shard near Susa, describing a mixture of goat fat, saffron, and the petals of a flower called night's blush. Supposedly, this blend kept the beard soft for weeks, even through a full campaign. Goat fat, you ask? Yes, and historians scratch their heads to this day. Maybe it worked, or maybe it just made the beard smell like dinner. You smile, the corners of your mouth easing as you feel a softness in the air. The Persian soldiers probably laughed about it too, trading secret blends behind the shield wall, finding tiny comfort in the warm, sweet oils. You breathe slowly, gently. Another scene rises. A traveling merchant arrives at a border fortress, carrying tiny glass vials from Egypt. Inside, a rare myrrh infused oil that claims to protect the beard from lice. A hard sell, maybe, but if you'd been weeks on horseback, you'd pay any price for that little bottle. One commander, records say, refused to eat until he'd scented his beard each morning. It was part of his identity, as vital as his sword or his shield. He believed that a fragrant beard kept fear at bay, reminding him he was still a man, not just a killer. This thread, scent as humanity, weaves through the entire Persian world. In a place of harsh battles, fierce politics, and merciless drought, these oils softened more than just hair. They softened the heart. Of course, the arguments continue among modern historians. Some think perfumed beards were only a royal affectation, while soldiers used simpler, cheaper oils, if any at all. But then someone discovers another broken bottle buried in a barracks, and the debate lights up all over again. Your eyelids grow heavy, as if a warm oil has been gently stroked across your own face. The voices of soldiers fade, replaced by the hush of palace halls at midnight. There, a prince waits nervously before a ceremony, adding one last drop of rose and saffron to his beard, praying it will hide his fear. In the silence, you might hear the soft crunch of sandals on tile, servants moving about, carrying trays of perfumed water, flickering lamps casting shadows against golden walls. The night is alive with scent, and with a kind of hope that even the fiercest empire could not completely crush. You let the thought settle over you, comforting as a warm blanket. These men were proud, they were brave, but they were also soft enough to want to smell good, to feel loved, to be human. And somewhere, centuries away, that same longing might still live in you, a desire to make yourself known, respected, remembered, even if only by the faintest breath of a rose. You feel your muscles slacken even more, your breathing slow and steady as the desert night continues to unfold around you. This time, your mind drifts into the grand halls of Persepolis, where diplomatic missions from every corner of the known world gathered under high arched ceilings. Here, beard scent was more than a habit, it was practically a language. The moment a visiting dignitary arrived, he was greeted by Persian nobles whose beards wafted rich, complicated fragrances rose, saffron, maybe even a hint of musk. It was a clear signal. We are powerful. We are refined. We are worthy of respect. A young scribe once recorded how the scent of these beards lingered for hours after a meeting, reminding guests exactly who held the upper hand. If you think a power handshake is intimidating, imagine being nose to nose with a beard perfumed in a recipe worth more than your entire house. You might chuckle at how fragile egos can be, but then again, a beard was an empire in miniature, carrying centuries of culture, faith, and social code. One odd historical detail that might amuse you before you drift off. Some Persians mixed crushed pomegranate seeds into their beard oils. Why? Possibly for color, or to add a sweet note, or just because pomegranates were so intertwined with Persian identity, they thought, why shouldn't my beard match my table? Modern historians are still debating it. Some argue the pomegranate had a religious symbolism, others that it was purely cosmetic. And so the debate goes on. You smile at the thought of bearded men sniffing each other politely, trying to decode whose beard oil carried which secret meaning. As you sink deeper, the story widens into the vast empire. Soldiers, priests, merchants, even farmers with a bit of spare coin, all finding ways to scent their beards. It was a unifying trait, a small pleasure that spanned social classes. But there were limits. Sources suggest that beard oils could become almost comically expensive, especially after foreign traders caught wind of the Persian obsession. A shipment of cinnamon oil from India, for example, might be priced so high that only a king could afford it. Naturally, that meant cheaper imitations began to flood the markets. You might grin at that. Even in ancient times, there was a black market for knockoff cologne. Some men were fooled into buying cheap oils cut with rancid animal fat, which could turn their proud beards into something noxious on a hot afternoon. In dusty back alleys, merchants would whisper about their pure saffron blends, but who could ever really know? Some historians argue these scams were rare, while others think they were practically a thriving industry. The texts just don't agree. Your eyelids flutter as if you too are drifting through a sleepy market, the smell of honest rose oil tangling with the sharper, spoiled notes of fakes. And somewhere in the night, you hear the faint clatter of coin purses, the hush of buyers making their choice, hoping not to be cheated. A mild breeze stirs, and you follow it back toward the royal palace, where the higher ranking nobles kept carefully guarded recipes, secrets handed down only through family lines. These men might even commission traveling perfumers to travel hundreds of miles to collect rare ingredients. That knowledge was power, and if you revealed the wrong scent, you might lose face forever. One story, almost too good to be true, tells of a young prince who spilled his entire beard oil flask before a royal audience. Supposedly, he was so ashamed that he left the court for years to redeem his honor. Did that really happen? Hard to say. Maybe it's just a moral tale whispered to frighten careless courtiers. But as you lie there, cozy and warm, you can almost sense the stress of that moment, the way a small slip might send a man's whole reputation crashing down. That's how serious beard fragrance could be in Persia's golden days. And still, beyond all the politics, you might sense the tenderness woven into it. Fathers teaching sons, brothers sharing tips, perfumers balancing oils late into the night so their clients could walk through the world a little taller. The night grows softer. You feel the hush settling in as if you too have joined them, seated by a flickering oil lamp, hands moving gently through your beard, a faint breath of rose and pomegranate whispering, "You are worthy." You let the scene fade, ready to follow its fragrance deeper into dreams, where the empire still stands, proud and perfumed. You breathe out slowly, your mind slipping further into that velvet darkness, where the flicker of a torch casts moving shadows on polished Persian stone. Here in this final corner of Act Two, you sense how the smallest rituals echoed through centuries. In the hush of a royal harem, the perfuming of a beard was almost a sacred rite. Attendants, with steady hands and careful eyes, warmed the oil over small terracotta lamps. They would test its heat on the inside of their wrist before pressing it into the beard, massaging it in with reverence, as though anointing a king. For a moment, you might feel their touch, gentle and assured, tracing through your own beard or the dream of one, soothing you into a calm that feels impossibly ancient. Sometimes, these beard oils were blended with a drop of honey, yes, honey, to trap scent molecules longer and keep the fragrance clinging to each hair. Modern historians still puzzle over whether this honeyed oil was practical or just sticky and annoying, but the Persian poets praised its sweetness. You might laugh a little, picturing a dignified general whose beard turned into a bee magnet on a hot day. Because, let's be honest, humans have always tried to push beauty rituals a bit too far. Even so, there was a kind of perfection in how they approached their grooming. It was an act of discipline, an expression of control in a world that so often felt chaotic and dangerous. When your empire stretched across deserts, mountains, and endless rival states, you needed small daily rituals to anchor you. A drop of scented oil, a prayer whispered under your breath, a comb smoothed through coarse, wind battered hair. These were the things that let a Persian man face the day. Some historians still debate whether the beard was more a political symbol or a religious one. Did these men truly believe a scented beard protected their soul? Or was it simply a way to signal to others that they belonged among the powerful? There are no certain answers. A broken tablet here, a half faded poem there, and we're left to wonder. As you lie still, the uncertainty becomes part of the piece. You don't have to solve the mystery. You just breathe and let the ancient fragrance move through you, as if your dreams have their own quiet ritual tonight. Outside the palace walls, you can imagine merchants lighting small fires to keep warm, their beards catching the faintest scent of smoke mixed with oil. That smoky, spiced aroma might have reminded them of home, of a mother's kitchen, of family. Scent carried memory, and memory was everything. One last curious note. There is a story of a Persian bride who refused to marry a man because his beard oil smelled cheap. It sounds cruel, but in a world where scent spoke your entire social truth, she may have been right. You might giggle under your breath, realizing how deeply tied to pride and courtship these rituals had become. You rest easier, knowing there is something universal in that, wanting to be desired, to be seen, to be respected. From ancient Persia to your own world, that wish never fades. And in the final hush before sleep takes you, you might hear again the calm, rhythmic strokes of a bronze comb moving through soft, perfumed hair. The image grows hazy, but the feeling stays, warm and steady. You are safe, you are cared for, and as the night folds itself around you, you might sense across thousands of years the quiet dignity of a well tended beard glowing in the lantern's light. You sink even further now, carried on the calm, rhythmic beat of your own breath, as the ancient world gently shifts into the final act of its quiet song. The night air seems cooler, softer, as you stand once again in a Persian courtyard. This time, the city is silent, the streets hushed, and only the low coo of doves breaks through the quiet. Here, you watch a father teaching his young son the art of beard care, the oil glinting golden in a clay lamp's glow. Each movement is measured, patient, as though every drop of rose and saffron might guard the boy's future. In a place where invaders came and went, and where a single mistake could cost you everything, these tiny rituals offered a measure of control. You might smile, thinking of your own daily habits, brushing your teeth, washing your face, and see how simple they seem compared to these perfumed ceremonies. Yet the heart of it is the same, a human wish to be whole, to be strong, to be loved. Some historians still can't agree on whether children truly learned these rituals so young or if that's a myth built from scraps of poetry. But the image is too peaceful to resist. A child memorizing the soft swirl of scented oil, trusting it would protect him in a world that could be so harsh. As you listen, you sense another layer. The old men of the palace, beards long and streaked with gray, carrying the weight of years. They too were loyal to their oils, adjusting recipes to soothe aging skin, to soften brittle hair. And when they spoke, people listened because a well groomed beard was a sign you were still vital, still powerful, still worthy of respect. Some strange details emerge, like the practice of mixing a little ground copper into the oil to add a reddish sheen. Historians wonder if this was a style statement or a way to suggest youth and fire. There is no clear answer, and you're free to imagine it however you like, drifting in and out of those marble halls. There's a deeper beauty in how the Persians believed scent connected them to the sacred. One verse in a crumbling prayer book hints that fragrant beards pleased not only humans, but also divine spirits, a kind of offering as though a man's soul lived in every drop of oil. Whether you believe that or not, the comfort of the idea is enough to lull you closer to dreams. You move with the rhythm of a gentle breeze, letting it swirl through the arches, catching the faintest note of civet musk and rose water. You can practically feel the brush of a comb through your hair, steady and slow, as if the world is paused just for this moment of self-care. And out in the empire beyond the palace, you see merchants oiling their beards at dawn, a simple act of hope before another day of bargaining and travel. Even among farmers in their sun-baked fields, a little drop of fragrant oil was worth the trouble, a reminder that no matter how hard the land, a person could still carry dignity. You ease deeper under your blanket, letting that thought soothe you. We all need those reminders that we matter, that our presence carries weight, that something as small as a pleasant fragrance can anchor us in a world that sometimes feels too big. And even as centuries have blurred the details, the scholars keep arguing. Was beard oil a seasonal custom or part of daily practice? Did the poorest men share in the ritual or only the rich? The clay tablets and half burnt scrolls don't fully agree, and maybe that's fine. It means the mystery stays open, leaving a place for your imagination to wander. In this quiet moment, you can almost see the flicker of a torch reflected in polished marble, hear the hush of sandals on tile, and catch that final swirl of rose and saffron drifting like a lullaby into the night. Your breathing is deep and unhurried now, the rhythm of the night holding you gently as the story drifts onward. You stand at the edge of a quiet garden where the shadows of cypress trees ripple in the moonlight, and a young noble sits beside a stone basin, carefully mixing his beard oil. He adds a final pinch of saffron, swirling it through warm sesame oil, the fragrance rising around him like a prayer. This ritual is his shield against tomorrow's courtly games, a moment to gather courage before facing rivals who would tear him down with a single rumor. You sense how much these ancient men relied on scent, not only to please their gods or their families, but to protect their own hearts. When power and betrayal were woven through every conversation, the oil offered one thing they could fully control. And that's a feeling you might know, too. The world can spin so fast, filled with chaos, but a small ritual, something gentle, something steady, can ground you. That connection across thousands of years makes you feel less alone, even in the hush of your own room. Some curious details still float through the quiet night. Records of a rosewater based beard oil so potent that it was said to attract bees from an entire orchard. You can almost laugh, imagining a Persian noble waving off a swarm while trying to maintain his dignity. Historians still argue if this is an exaggeration or a true cautionary tale, but either way, it gives the scent a mythic power. Another strange note: clay jars with tiny bronze spoons attached by delicate chains. These spoons helped measure the perfect drop, because a man who over-applied might be seen as careless, even shameful. The measure of a Persian gentleman was in his precision, his patience, and the restraint of his perfume. As you let that image drift through you, the gentle scrape of the spoon against the jar might echo in your mind, a calm, repetitive sound that soothes you toward sleep. You wander through the garden, the scent of night blooming jasmine mixing with the warm oils of the men tending their beards. Lamps flicker between pillars of stone, sending golden reflections across pools of still water. You sense how those little pools mirrored the stars, as if reminding every man here that he was just a small part of something vast. The Persians believed that harmony with the divine was possible if you kept yourself pure, and for them, that included a beard carefully oiled, combed, and offered to the night air. You might find a kind of peace in that thought, as though even in a harsh empire, beauty and devotion could still survive. Of course, scholars debate whether these spiritual ideals truly lived in the day to day routine, or if they were simply the wishful thinking of poets. Did a busy merchant really think of Ahura Mazda while dabbing oil into his beard before a long day of trade? The fragments of letters and poems don't agree, but here in your soft bed, you don't have to settle that argument. You just have to breathe and let the image warm you. A man, steady and calm, tending to himself before stepping into a complicated world. In the far corner of the garden, you see an older noble showing a younger relative the right way to warm the oil, the gentle way to smooth it in, how to brush downward with patience. The older man's beard is streaked with white, but shines softly in the lamplight, proof that the ritual lasts through a lifetime. You feel how those quiet lessons cross centuries: a father, a son, a brother, a teacher, all sharing the same peaceful knowledge. That sense of legacy settles around you like a blanket, comforting, steady, a reminder that no matter how much the world changes, some small acts of care will always survive. You exhale, the air cool against your lips as the night deepens. The breeze in that dreamlike Persian garden carries a last swirl of rose and saffron to your senses, letting you rest in the hush, fully at peace. You drift even deeper, the stillness wrapping around you like a soft cloak as the final threads of the story unfurl. The Persian night has grown hushed, the air cooled by a whispering breeze, and you find yourself back in the great halls of Persepolis, where lamplight trembles across marble columns. Here, you watch an aging court poet tracing words on a parchment, describing the glory of a warrior's beard, scented with cardamom and myrtle. He writes of how the fragrance announced a man's courage before his sword ever did, how it carried the dreams of his ancestors, layered through the warm oils. You sense the weight of those words, the hope packed into every line, the wish that a simple ritual could guard a man's soul from the world's sharpest edges. Even today, historians debate whether this kind of poetry was serious or pure flattery. Did anyone actually believe a perfumed beard could give them victory? Or was it just a beautiful way to say, I am ready? The truth may be lost to time, but that doesn't make the story any less lovely to hold. And somewhere down those halls, a high ranking general stands before a polished bronze mirror, steadying himself for another campaign. His beard is soft, shining, its scent carefully balanced so that no note overwhelms the other. Rose and cypress, a trace of saffron, enough to remind him he is more than a soldier, he is a living legacy. He breathes out the same way you do now, slow and calm, letting the night settle around him. There's a strange, almost funny detail in one merchant's account that during times of plague, some men added crushed garlic to their beard oils, believing it would ward off disease. Whether it worked or not is a mystery, but you can picture the conflicting scents of rose, saffron, and pungent garlic swirling in the heat. That too is human, a little desperate, a little hopeful, trying anything to stay safe. You smile as you listen to that memory echo through the empire. Some scholars still fight over whether the garlic note was practical or superstition. It hardly matters now. What matters is that someone, somewhere, cared enough to try. Beyond the palace, in smaller villages, men with simpler means also found ways to perfume their beards. Maybe it was just thyme from the garden or a scrap of rosewater brought home by a cousin. The dream was the same, to face the world with dignity, to carry pride and faith in every breath. You feel a deep calm spread through you, a knowing that these tiny rituals connect people across centuries, no matter how grand or humble. In the final hush of this night, the image returns. A father smoothing a last drop of oil into his son's beard before sending him to stand in front of a future bride. A soft blessing, a moment of hope, a reminder that he is worthy, strong, and good. That tenderness reaches you now, steady and true, wrapping around your own heart as you breathe. And so the empire settles into sleep, the lamps guttering out one by one, the night air fragrant with a last swirl of rose, saffron, and maybe even a hint of honey. The dreams of men, carried gently on the breeze, promise that tomorrow will come and that they will be ready. You let yourself rest in that certainty, a final lullaby whispered through oil, prayer, and quiet courage. Now, slow everything down with me. Let your shoulders drop, let your jaw unclench, and feel your breath grow softer, more spacious. The night is here to hold you, safe and gentle, with no expectations and no demands. You can leave behind the images of shining beards, fragrant oils, ancient marketplaces, and let them float like a thin mist far across your mind. Every sound around you begins to soften, as if wrapped in a comforting blanket. The stories of long ago warriors and poets gently dissolve, their fragrant echoes fading to nothing but a peaceful hush. If there is any tension left in your body, allow it to drift away on the breeze, as though it were carried off by those old Persian perfumes. Feel your pillow cradle you. Feel the steady rise and fall of your breath, like the calm rhythm of the desert after the wind has stopped. You are enough exactly as you are. There is no war to fight tonight, no throne to guard, no kingdom to impress, only the softness of this moment, steady and healing. You can imagine one final swirl of rosewater passing through the night air, a symbol of peace, of rest, of closing your eyes with gratitude. Let your thoughts grow light and blurry, as though a gentle veil has settled over them, protecting you from everything outside this warm circle of calm. Trust that you are safe, that sleep is your ally, that the hush of the world is here to help you heal. Let your heart settle. Let your breathing slow even more. Let your dreams rise gently, guided by the quiet. Hey everyone, tonight we are going to wander down a darkened medieval alleyway, lit only by the flicker of tallow candles in windows, maybe a faint trail of wood smoke curling through the misty air, and peer into the world of eel pies. Yes, eel pies. Those humble, slippery creatures wrapped in a pastry shell, baked to a golden brown, steaming in hearths across medieval Europe. You might not think that sounds very appetizing, and honestly, you might be right. But medieval housewives absolutely loved them, and tonight you're going to find out why. You'll almost be able to smell that earthy, fishy aroma drifting from their kitchen hearths as you pull up a wooden stool and watch. And fair warning, you probably wouldn't survive a medieval kitchen even 5 minutes. Between the smoke, the questionable hygiene, and the flailing knives, you'd be knocked out cold before dessert. So before you settle in completely, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And feel free to share where you are watching from and what time it is there. I'm always fascinated to know. Now turn off your lights, switch on that gentle fan for a bit of cozy background noise, and let's begin tonight's journey. You step into the cramped medieval kitchen, and the first thing that hits you is the overwhelming scent of smoke and boiling broth. You can see a cauldron bubbling over a hearth, its lid rattling from the buildup of steam, while a woman in a coarse linen dress leans over a battered wooden table, carefully gutting a wriggling eel. Eels were prized in medieval Europe, especially in England and France, because they were so wonderfully abundant. They practically begged to be caught. These slippery creatures populated rivers in numbers that seem mythical today, so housewives leaned heavily on them for a steady source of protein. That might seem odd to you, but eels were truly the working class seafood of their day. No fancy scallops or imported salmon for most households, just the common eel, fresh from a muddy riverbank. And once prepared, they were baked in thick, savory pies that could keep for days, making them ideal for a time when preserving food was a never ending battle. In fact, one of the main truths here is that medieval families needed something that was safe to eat, with protein locked away from insects and rot. And pastry was basically the medieval Tupperware. You stand near the doorway as the woman pinches her nose at the slippery eel's fishy tang, sprinkling a bit of parsley and sage across its glistening flesh. The medieval palate, of course, did not know tomatoes, chili peppers, or even potatoes. Instead, herbs from the garden, parsley, thyme, hyssop, had to carry the flavor, and a good deal of salt did the rest. You watch as she folds the eel pieces into a thick dough, then sets them on a stone hearth, letting the heat work its magic. You can almost hear the hiss of the juices seeping out as the crust starts to brown. One strange side note you might appreciate: some medieval cooks added sugar to their eel pies. Yes, sugar, which was expensive and prized, but they still sprinkled it on savory eels. The sweet savory combination was a sign of wealth and sophistication back then, though it might make you shiver just thinking about it. Historians still puzzle over whether these sugar and eel experiments were meant to showcase status or simply an overenthusiastic cook trying to show off. As you lean closer, the smoky air begins to sting your eyes. Medieval homes rarely had chimneys in the early Middle Ages, so all that dense smoke had nowhere to go except up, around, and into your lungs. Housewives adapted by working as quickly as possible, fanning their faces with their aprons, and accepting a cough or two as the price of a hot meal. You can practically feel the sting in your own throat, and you're grateful you can slip away from that kitchen at any moment. They couldn't. The lady of the house pulls the pie from the hearth. The crust is cracked and rustic, and you see bits of eel tail poking out. It's strange to you, but to her it is beautiful, a victory over hunger, over spoilage, over the endless gray of medieval existence. In a society without refrigerators or sealed containers, pies were not simply comfort food. They were a kind of shield, protecting the precious fish inside from maggots, mice, and mildew. You stand observing this ritual and wonder if they ever got tired of eel. The answer, you realize, is probably not when the next alternative was starvation. And yet they spiced things up, so to speak, by adding herbs from every corner of their small gardens, mixing in verjuice, a sour liquid pressed from unripe grapes, and even bits of dried fruit, if they could afford it. You'd think eel was a hardship food, but it was actually quite a prize. In many medieval towns, people had to pay a tax in eels, sometimes thousands per year, to local landlords or religious houses. Imagine your landlord asking for 400 eels instead of rent money. That's a real historical record from parts of 12th century England where eels were so common they formed a kind of aquatic currency. Historians still debate whether these payments were truly standardized or whether they were more of a convenient local tradition. Records are patchy, and arguments continue among experts. You hear a low laugh from the housewife as she wipes sweat from her brow and motions to the children waiting for their slice. There is genuine pride in her face, the kind you see when a job is done and hunger has been held off for one more day. For them, eel pie was hope wrapped in pastry. You almost want to try it yourself, almost, though your modern stomach might have other opinions. As you look around the kitchen, you notice the walls are darkened with soot, the floor is packed dirt, and there is a faint scurrying sound in the corner. Rats, bold as ever. No one seems terribly bothered. The cat perched on a rafter keeps one eye half open, ready to strike if they grow too brazen. Medieval kitchens were constant battlefields between cooks and vermin, and the housewife here was as much a general as a chef. One bite of that pie, you imagine, might taste earthy and fishy, perhaps with a surprising burst of spice. Medieval cooks used an astonishing amount of pepper, imported along trade routes that stretched all the way to India. So even though they lived in a world of thatch and smoke, they still enjoyed faraway flavors. It's a weird contradiction, right? Eels from the local river, pepper from a merchant caravan crossing deserts. This, too, is what made medieval foodways fascinating. You lean back a moment, listening to the crackle of the fire, the hush of the evening outside, and the soft sounds of the family as they settle in with their humble feast. It's peaceful, in a way, a fragile peace built on the backs of river eels and hand mixed pastry dough. As the woman cuts a slice for each hungry child, she looks for a moment toward the low window where the last rays of sunlight fade. In that instant, you see her shoulders relax. The eel pie is done. The children will sleep fed tonight. Tomorrow they will wake and do it all again, fishing more eels, or rolling out more pastry, tending the smoky hearth. You realize that while their lives were harsh, the rhythm itself gave them a kind of comfort, a sense of control in a world where war, plague, and random misfortune could steal everything in a blink. You wonder, as you stand there, if you could ever get used to it. The eels, the smoke, the endless repetition. Maybe, maybe not. But you have to respect the quiet heroism in making one more pie. And that is just the beginning of the story of medieval eel pie. You slip back into the same medieval kitchen the next day, the morning chill still clinging to the walls like a damp blanket. The hearth is already smoldering, and the familiar tang of yesterday's eel clings to the air. You notice the woman stirring again, already busy with a new catch. Eels, after all, waited for no one. They had to be cleaned quickly, or they'd slip right out of the bucket, wriggling for freedom. You watch as she grabs a particularly feisty one, gripping it with calloused fingers, hardened by years of fish guts and flour. You might think of medieval housewives as delicate or passive, but standing here, you see the truth. They were strong, endlessly patient, and more than a little ruthless when needed. After all, someone had to feed the family, and nobody was going to do it for them. There's a faint metallic scent of fresh blood as she guts the eel with a small battered knife. A knife so dull it might barely cut a carrot in your modern kitchen, but sharp enough for her skillful hands. The strange part is how quick and calm she moves. The eels hardly stand a chance. That's one solid historical truth. Medieval cooks had to work with tools that would horrify a modern chef, but they made do. Knives blackened by fire, wooden spoons half eaten by insects, stone mortars with chips in the rim. They were all pressed into service, and the food still had to taste good at the end of the day. Your eyes wander to a bucket of herbs at her feet. There's marjoram and parsley, and even a little rosemary. Medieval people loved herbs not only for flavor, but because they believed they protected against disease. It was the age of miasma theory, after all, where bad smells were thought to carry illness. So a house that smelled of herbs felt safer. You can almost taste the bitter, peppery tang rising from the chopped greens. It's a detail you might have overlooked, but in medieval minds, those herbs were medicine as well as seasoning. She sprinkles a little salt over the flesh, massaging it in with surprising tenderness. Salt was precious, shipped in from faraway mines, or scraped from seaside pans. Sometimes, peasants even had to pay a special tax just to be allowed to buy it. One of the curious things you notice is how obsessed they were with preserving food. Everything revolved around keeping the harvest from rotting. If you had salt, you had hope. You could survive a winter. You could keep your family fed even when the rivers froze and eels went into hiding. And here's a strange tidbit. There were laws about how many eels you could catch and who was allowed to fish them. It sounds ridiculous, But eel fishing was a regulated medieval industry. Some villages had entire guilds of eel fishermen who carefully guarded their rights. Historians still puzzle over how these guilds enforced their rules. No one's sure whether it was legal muscle or local intimidation or a bit of both. You drift closer to the hearth, where the housewife is now rolling out a fresh dough. The flour is gritty, nothing like today's smooth white powder. Medieval grain was ground in rough stone mills, leaving bits of husk and grit mixed in, enough to wear your teeth down if you weren't careful. So a medieval smile might have been missing a few teeth, not just from sugar, but from all that abrasive bread and pastry. As the dough begins to form, you see the flakes of bran poking through, giving it a dark, hearty look. She pauses, then reaches for a small jar, opening it to reveal a few shriveled raisins. A luxury, truly. Dried fruit was precious, carried along trade routes that could be dangerous and slow. To mix sweet raisins with the rich eel might sound, well, disgusting to you, but back then it was a culinary dream. There was no division of sweet and savory as we know it today. They wanted to showcase every flavor at once, all crashing together, a medieval festival in your mouth. As the pie goes into the oven, the children gather again, their eyes wide with anticipation. You can sense that this was the highlight of their day, a hot meal, something filling, something different from the thin pottage they usually had. You imagine them dreaming of those rich flavors while helping in the fields or gathering firewood, a rare moment of true delight in their rugged little world. The pie begins to brown, and you catch a whiff of something that might actually tempt you, even with modern sensibilities. A roasted, almost nutty aroma from the dough, mingling with herbs, and a faint sweetness from the raisins. You could imagine it, at least for a second, being something cozy and warm. If you closed your eyes, maybe you could forget the eels entirely. And then there's the question of why medieval people clung to eels so ferociously. It wasn't just about supply, it was about religion. During Lent and other church imposed fasting seasons, eating meat from land animals was forbidden. But fish, that was allowed. And eels, being fish like enough, made them the perfect loophole. There are documents showing that huge numbers of eels were harvested specifically to feed the faithful during these long, hungry months. Some medieval monks even ran entire eel fisheries to guarantee their share of protein through Lent. Scholars still debate whether the church turned a blind eye to the eel boom or actively encouraged it. The housewife takes a deep breath as she pulls the pie from the hearth again. The crust is a little darker today, cracked but golden. She sets it aside to cool, knowing that if she cuts into it too soon, all the juices will spill out and no one will get a proper bite. Medieval cooks had to master patience. Nothing could be rushed when you depended on fire and coals rather than dials and timers. You can practically feel the heat on your own skin, the sweat gathering at the nape of your neck, the sticky warmth pressing against your chest. A light breeze through the open door brings a relief, along with the sound of distant church bells. The family crosses themselves quickly, a reflex in a world where faith was stitched into every part of daily life. Then they return to watching the pie. The mother lifts a knife, worn thin from countless meals, and finally slices through the crust. The children breathe in together, a chorus of hope. As they eat, you look around again. The fire burns lower now, a red glow pulsing against blackened stones. The smell of eel and herbs seems to fill every pore of the room. It's a simple meal, but to them it is everything, proof of hard work, of skill, of survival. You think about how your own life is filled with convenience and packaged foods and refrigeration, and wonder what it would feel like to depend on a river's yield for your next dinner. In that reflection, you almost hear the housewife's unspoken mantra: feed them today so they can wake tomorrow. There is no guarantee beyond that. You admire her quiet strength, a pillar for her small world. And then a little chuckle rises in your throat because you catch sight of a half burnt loaf in the corner. Even medieval supermoms burned the bread sometimes, you guess. That moment of human imperfection is strangely comforting. No matter how far back you travel, people are still people, trying their best, messing up, laughing it off, and starting again. You linger for a while longer, the warm air lulling you into a kind of trance. Maybe it's the rhythmic hush of the children eating, or the faint breeze stirring the herbs that hang drying from the rafters. Maybe it's the tiny drip of water in the corner where a cracked jug has been leaking all afternoon. Whatever it is, you feel a peacefulness settle around you. The eel pie might not be a gourmet dish, but it has become a symbol of something deeply human: adaptation, hope, and the constant desire to care for the people you love. You follow the quiet rhythms of the house into the next day, the early light creeping through wooden shutters and picking out the dust motes that dance in the stale air. Another day, another eel pie. The routine is so steady, so absolute, that you feel yourself being drawn deeper into it. You see the woman gather up her worn basket, stepping outside toward the riverbank where the eels are kept alive in woven traps. The path is muddy, the air sharp and raw, and you sense her determination as she trudges through. Eels were a gift of nature, a protein source that practically volunteered itself to the medieval table, but they were still tricky, sly things, slippery and unpredictable. Catching them required patience, timing, and a steady hand. She reaches down and lifts the basket, revealing a knot of silvery, writhing shapes twisting over each other, cold and glossy. They look alien, like something from a horror movie, and you shiver a little just watching them. But she shows no fear, only focus. With practiced movements, she holds the basket toward the house, where a waiting barrel of fresh water will keep the catch alive until cooking time. That was critical because spoilage started almost immediately once an eel died. If you wanted the freshest, safest meat, you kept them alive until the very last moment. A detail modern food safety specialists might even applaud. Back inside, the hearth has barely cooled from the night before. The embers still glow, and she rakes them forward to rebuild the fire, layering thin sticks over the coals until it leaps back to life. There's something soothing about it, how she breathes the flame back awake, the simple power of fire at her command. You might have gas or electric stoves, but for her, this dance with wood and embers is the only way to feed her family. You can practically feel the scratchy warmth rising up your arms. Next, she sharpens her knife on a stone worn hollow by years of grinding. The blade is blackened, the handle loose, but it still works. Medieval people took good care of their tools, not because they loved them, but because replacing them was costly and difficult. Each knife was a little family heirloom in its own right, passed down, repaired, repurposed, adapted. It's a reminder that possessions then were not disposable. They were precious, even sacred in their own way. You watch as she lays out today's herbs. There's something new in the mix, a faintly anise scented bunch of sweet Sicily, a plant that medieval cooks adored for its mild sweetness. It added a gentler taste, like a natural sugar, to dishes that otherwise might be harsh or too salty. You almost want to lean in and sniff it, catching that faintly herbal perfume. If you were living in a world where sugar was a rare treasure, this little green herb was the next best thing. As she readies the eel, there's a moment of stillness. Her children have gathered again, already anticipating the meal. They've learned to love this routine, to recognize the smell of the fish and herbs as something that means stability and security. You look at their hopeful eyes, and you realize eel pie was never just food, it was a daily prayer made solid. The woman slices the eel with efficient flicks of her wrist, then rinses it with water from a bucket that's been carried in from the well. The water is murky by modern standards, full of floating particles, but to them it is clean enough, fresh enough, and a vast improvement over some stagnant pond. Medieval water sources were tricky. People knew they could get sick from bad water, but their options were few, so they boiled, salted, and spiced their food as much as they could to protect themselves. And here's a fun little fact. Some medieval households trained children as young as 5 or 6 to help gut eels because there were just too many to prepare alone. Little hands were expected to learn these skills early, a detail that might make your modern sense of childhood protection bristle. Historians still argue about how harsh this was. Some say it was a necessity, others argue it stole childhood away. Like so much about the medieval world, the answer is tangled in context. Back at the hearth, the woman begins to assemble the pie again. Dough is pressed out, ragged at the edges, with those familiar bits of brawn clinging to the surface. She sprinkles sweet Sicily across the eel, adding a final pinch of salt, and you notice her lips moving in a silent prayer. Perhaps she's blessing the food. Perhaps she's asking for one more peaceful night, free of raiders or disease or famine. The line between food and faith was incredibly thin back then. One nourished the body, the other the soul. As the pie goes into the oven, you see her rub her arms against the morning cold, then brush a strand of hair from her face. She looks tired, but there's a spark in her eyes, a kind of steely confidence. She knows this will feed everyone tonight, and that knowledge is its own kind of power. When the crust begins to brown, the children can barely contain themselves. They inch closer, breathing in the tang of herbs and the warm, fishy scent that might seem repulsive to you, but feels like heaven to them. The hearth crackles, the coals shift, and for a moment you could almost believe time has stood still, suspended in the aroma of baking eel. You glance around the kitchen again and see a few other odd details. A pot of onions, slightly sprouted, a sack of rough salt with clumps the size of your knuckles, a half-rotted apple that will probably be eaten anyway. Nothing was ever wasted. You learn something important here. Medieval kitchens were triumphs of improvisation, of using up every crumb, every scrap, until nothing remained. As she pulls out the pie, you catch a final odd detail, a carved wooden spoon decorated with a swirl pattern, worn smooth. Perhaps it was her mother's. Perhaps it was a wedding gift. Objects like these tell their own stories, pass through the generations with quiet pride. She cuts the pie, steam billowing up, making your mouth water even if you'd sworn you'd never touch an eel. And the children gather around, hands out, waiting. It's a peaceful moment, and you savor it because you know, deep down, this rhythm, catch, gut, bake, feed, is what kept entire families alive. And you can almost hear a gentle, silly voice in your mind. If you had to depend on eel pies, you'd be really, really motivated to invent the fridge. The afternoon sun slants through the kitchen's crooked shutters, catching on the soot darkened beams overhead. You step further inside, feeling how warm the air has grown as the fresh eel pie cools on the table. The woman finally sits, folding her tired hands in her lap, taking a moment's rest while her children devour the steaming slices. You notice the way they eat. No fuss, no picky complaints, just grateful mouths and hungry bellies. It reminds you how powerful even a simple meal can be when the alternative is going to bed empty. There's a strange sort of peace in that moment, a pause in that endless medieval scramble. You can almost hear the distant clatter of hooves on the village road, the muffled chatter of neighbors going about their business. But here inside, it feels like the world has stopped. One eel pie, one quiet dinner, one safe evening. As she watches the children, the mother reaches for a small leather pouch at her side. She unties it and carefully counts out a few tiny coins, battered and uneven. They're a sorry sight, but they represent so much, maybe enough to buy another handful of herbs or a bit of salted fish for a festival day. Every penny counted in this world. Even a stray copper piece lost under the hearth could mean a meal missed. There's something odd tucked inside the pouch, a small, carved token shaped like a fish. A charm, perhaps, to bring good luck in fishing, or maybe to protect the family from river spirits, which people believed could steal their catch or sicken their water. Medieval superstition and faith were tangled together like a knot, impossible to separate. The line between practical and mystical was thin. You prayed for a good harvest, but you also threw a little carved fish into your basket, just in case the saints were busy that day. You glance back at the children, who chatter through mouthfuls of pie. Their laughter seems out of place in such a hard world, but that's childhood for you. It insists on joy, even in the most ragged corners of existence. The mother smiles at them, tired but satisfied, then lifts a piece of crust for herself, finally taking a bite. Her eyes close, just for a second, as the familiar taste fills her mouth. You can almost feel the relief in her shoulders. She's done it. One more day, one more meal, one more bit of survival carved out from a harsh world. You might wonder if she ever dreamt of something more. And the answer is yes, of course she did. Even the poorest medieval people had dreams, plans, hopes for their children to grow stronger, wiser, luckier than they were. But at the end of the day, those dreams had to wait behind the immediacy of a full belly. That was the constant background to medieval life. Tomorrow's wishes stood patiently behind today's needs. A small, funny moment breaks the mood. One of the children snags a piece of pie, and it slips right off the crust, plopping onto the dirt floor. They pause, look at the mother, then quickly scoop it up and shove it into their mouth before she can scold them. You can't help but grin. Even in the Middle Ages, kids knew how to sneak a second helping. The hearth's glow begins to dim, turning from brilliant orange to a dull red, then finally soft gray ash. You hear a rooster crowing outside, confused by the late sunshine and a dog barking somewhere down the lane. These small sounds make the kitchen feel alive, a comforting pulse of daily life that has repeated for centuries. The mother wipes her hands on her rough apron and looks around the room. Her gaze takes in the children, the battered pot in the corner, the pie reduced to crumbs, the fresh eels waiting for tomorrow's chore, and for a moment she lets herself smile. It is a quiet, powerful smile, the kind that says, I've done enough today. That is victory. Then she rises and begins to clean. Medieval kitchens did not simply pause after meals. There was wood to stack, knives to rinse, floors to sweep. Otherwise, rats would sneak in, or mold would creep up the walls, or some foul spirit, real or imagined, might decide to settle in. She works quickly, efficient and focused, brushing crumbs into the fire, checking the corners for any forgotten bits. A piece of onion skin clings to her sleeve. She flicks it off without a second thought. You notice how normal this feels, how close it is to your own routine. Wipe the counter, sweep the floor, sigh in relief. The centuries collapse in that moment, and you realize the link between you and her is far stronger than you'd expect. The children drift away to the low sleeping bench by the wall, curling up together under a single wool blanket. They smell of herbs and river water, but they sleep deeply, soothed by a full belly and the lullaby of crackling embers. There's one last curious moment before the mother banks the fire for the night. She takes a small pinch of herbs from her pouch, sage mostly, and tosses it into the coals. The scent fills the air sharper than before, and you remember that medieval people sometimes believed certain herbs chased away illness or evil spirits. It might be superstition, but you can't deny the comforting calm it brings to the darkened room. She murmurs a prayer, simple and low, then covers the coals with a clay pot to hold the heat until morning. Tomorrow will come, and with it more eel, more flour, more worries. But tonight is safe, and you have to laugh just a bit, because you imagine explaining all of this to someone today. Yes, they basically lived on slimy river fish wrapped in medieval Tupperware. You'd probably get some horrified stares, but you know the truth now. In that quiet moment, you let your mind drift. You feel the heavy fish-scented air, the creak of old timbers, the tickle of straw underfoot. The mother stands in the doorway, staring out into the star-speckled night, and you sense the weight of centuries behind her. Medieval housewives didn't just make eel pies, they held the world together, one crust at a time. You slip forward in time, carried by the comforting rhythm of that same medieval hearth, and find yourself once again in the company of eel pies. Only now, the story is bigger than a single cottage. The river's bounty was never just about one family. No, eels built economies, sustained entire parishes, and even fed the politics of medieval Europe. You stand at the edge of a bustling medieval market, the rough wooden stalls creaking as merchants haul baskets of eels onto the counters, each one slick and glistening under the morning sun. The air is a heady swirl of fishy brine, muddy straw, and sweat, layered over the sharp tang of vinegar and onions from other food sellers nearby. You watch a man thump the side of a wicker eel basket with a practiced hand, proving the catch is still alive. A customer leans closer, sniffing suspiciously, then nods and counts out a few copper coins. It's an entire eel economy on display, and you can't help but marvel. You probably couldn't survive 5 minutes in the crush of elbows, bartering shouts, and sharp smells. But this was a lifeline. Across medieval England, especially, eel rents were collected as taxes. People paid their landlords, bishops, even kings in thousands upon thousands of eels, stacked in barrels, salted or still squirming, depending on the season. Historical records show a staggering number of eels owed by peasants every year. In one 12th century village, they recorded more than 30,000 eels collected in rent. Yes, you heard that right. 30,000. That's a slippery mountain of taxes, my friend. You wander through the market, dodging a woman swinging a basket of leeks dangerously close to your face, and listen to the babble of voices. They talk of river levels, of how the catch is down this year, of how the big landlord upriver has demanded double the usual eel rent. It sounds just like a modern mortgage crisis, only much fishier. You have to laugh softly at that. One of the fishmongers shows off a pie, already baked, its crust scored with a fish pattern to advertise the filling inside. Pies like these traveled surprisingly far. They could be taken on the road, given as gifts, even used to curry favor at court. It's no wonder they became a fixture on medieval tables, from peasant huts to royal banquets. They were the perfect medieval fast food, portable and preserved. But that doesn't mean they were easy to make. You pause by a woman who is slicing through eels right there at her stall, working with a tiny battered knife, no bigger than your pinky. Her hands are strong, stained from river mud, and her fingernails are black with soot. Medieval fishmongers had no illusions about glamour. You admire her speed, though. The cuts are clean, efficient, unstoppable. The same skill you saw in that cottage repeats here in the market, scaled up, multiplied 100-fold. The pies she sells are stacked on a cloth-covered table, their crusts thick and browned, designed to withstand rough travel on a cart or a long day in someone's saddlebag. You can almost smell the pepper and parsley woven through them. That's the historical truth you hold on to. Pepper was a prized spice, carried overland through endless trade routes, shockingly expensive, and yet medieval people loved it so much they crammed it into even the humble eel pie. They wanted that sharp, biting heat in their food, proof that they were connected to a vast, distant world beyond their rivers. And here's something odd you might not have expected. Eel pies were sometimes served with a side of almond milk sauce. Yes, medieval cooks loved blending fish with nuts, herbs, and a splash of verjuice to create a sweet-sour flavor profile. Almond milk was a favorite medieval ingredient, especially during Lent. You might wrinkle your nose at the idea of fish and nuts together, but to them it was a luxurious treat. Historians still argue about whether this was a true marker of wealth or just a passing food fad that caught on because of religious restrictions. As you move through the market, you catch bits of conversation about church rules. The clergy had a deep stake in the eel trade after all. Monasteries owned vast river fisheries, leasing them to villagers, or operating them directly to stock their own kitchens. These rivers practically pulsed with religious politics. Who could fish, when and how much went straight to the local abbey. The church's dietary codes made eels a loophole so lucrative that some monasteries built entire fortunes around them. A breeze sweeps through the market, fluttering the edge of someone's cloak, carrying the smell of roast onions and hot coals. You close your eyes a moment and let the sounds wash over you, the jangle of coins, the scrape of a blade on a fish's spine, the quick, clipped calls of a seller praising their wares. It feels chaotic and timeless all at once, and just as you're enjoying the moment, a small boy darts past, nearly knocking you over as he chases a runaway eel. The eel flops madly through puddles and straw, and the boy lunges, missing by inches. The crowd laughs, and someone even cheers. You have to chuckle too. Medieval slapstick, right there in the fish market. After a while, you notice one of the pie sellers packing up her baskets, heading for the main road. You follow at a safe distance, curious. She's off to sell her pies to travelers, maybe pilgrims making their way to some distant shrine, hungry after weeks on muddy roads. You realize eel pies were perfectly designed for that sort of journey. No need to eat them piping hot, no worry about spoilage for a couple of days. In an age with no refrigeration, that was nothing short of miraculous. As she stops to talk to a group of pilgrims, you hear her recite a small prayer over the pies, asking for safe passage and a good trade. Faith and food again, woven together. You watch the pilgrims trade coins, then hurry on, biting into their pies with obvious relief. And for a second, you imagine yourself among them, tired from the road, grateful for something, anything, to fill your stomach. Maybe the eels wouldn't seem so strange then. Maybe they'd taste like salvation. You follow the flow of those pilgrims down the dusty medieval road, their footsteps crunching over gravel and stray straw blown in from passing carts. They walk with a weary determination, their clothes road-stained and patched, carrying bundles of odds and ends tied with rough rope. The pies they bought back at the market hang in satchels against their hips, a practical miracle of medieval travel. You can almost hear the crust cracking under the weight of bouncing steps, the herbs and pepper inside mingling with the scent of warm bodies, leather, and the sharp tang of sweat. As you wander among them, you catch snatches of conversation. Someone wonders aloud if St. Cuthbert will bless their journey. Another worries about bandits lurking in the woods ahead. A third complains that his feet are killing him. Nothing changes, you suppose, even across the centuries. You might smile because, if you tried to make this same trip today, you'd have better shoes, but probably the same aching arches. One of the pilgrims shares a chunk of eel pie with a fellow traveler, breaking off the crust carefully and handing it over with surprising reverence. It's not just food, it's a kind of bond, a small act of generosity that might earn him a friend on the lonely road. And you see the other man close his eyes for a moment as he tastes that blend of fish, herbs, and gritty flour, his shoulders relaxing in obvious relief. That's the strange historical truth here. Medieval food didn't just feed bodies, it tied people together. It was currency, it was celebration, it was a way to say, "You matter to me." You walk alongside them as the road dips toward a shallow river crossing. There, under the gray sky, a group of fishermen tends their traps, pulling out yet more eels to be packed in barrels for shipment to distant towns. The traps are woven from willow branches, their shapes familiar and comforting after so many generations of use. Eel fishing was a living art, passed from parent to child, and these men move with a calm, practiced precision that only comes from lifetimes spent on riverbanks. They gut and salt the eels right there on the shore, working so fast you barely follow the movements. Salt was everything, a powerful preservative, a measure of wealth, a necessity to keep food through lean months. Medieval people saw salt as near sacred, sometimes blessing it with prayers before storing it in clay crocks. And if you think you can handle medieval taxes today, remember that salt itself was often taxed harshly, leading to smuggling and black markets that kept entire villages up at night worrying about the king's agents. One man, broad shouldered and weather beaten, is singing a rough tune as he slices eels open. It's a crude ballad about St. Peter blessing fishermen with a great catch, although the language gets so bawdy in the middle you nearly choke on a laugh. Medieval humor, you realize, was unfiltered, let's say. If you survived on eel pie day after day, you'd probably develop a wild sense of humor too. As they pack the barrels, a local tax collector arrives on horseback, his fine wool cloak dusty from the road. He dismounts and begins checking each barrel, jotting notes on a wax tablet, measuring out the Lord's share. There's tension among the fishermen, but they keep working. They can't risk angering the officials. In medieval England, records show some rivers were so strictly regulated that a wrong measure of eel taxes could see a peasant fined into ruin. Historians still argue about how fair or predatory these taxes really were, and you suspect the truth, as always, lands somewhere in between. The pilgrims cross the river slowly, careful not to slip, their staff tapping stones ahead of them. You keep pace, hearing the hiss of water against their boots, the creak of worn leather straps holding their packs. One of them asks a fisherman if it's true that eating eel cures certain illnesses. The fisherman shrugs, says he heard it helps with fevers, but not to trust him on that. Medieval people believed eel meat was cold and moist in humoral medicine terms, supposedly balancing out hot illnesses, a theory we'd laugh at today, but they took it seriously enough to write it down in medical treatises. Once across, the group rests under a lone oak tree, sharing bits of pie and passing a thin flask of ale between them. The crust is hard from travel, but they still chew it down, grateful for its protection. You watch a young boy peel away the pastry carefully, trying to pick out the herbs tucked inside, maybe a mint leaf, maybe a sprig of sage, and you realize how these small details, so easily ignored, made life bearable. They talk of home, of fields waiting for harvest, of families left behind, of prayers for safety, and you hear something heartbreakingly familiar in their voices, the same worries you'd have about your own family if you were gone for weeks. In that moment, medieval people stop being dusty names in books and become human, painfully, wonderfully human. A breeze ruffles the branches above, sending a scatter of leaves drifting down, and the boy laughs as one sticks to his hair. For a second, you feel time blur, the centuries melting away, and you could almost believe this was a camping trip with friends. Rough, uncomfortable, but filled with moments of silly laughter. That is what eel pie carried with it. Not just calories, but a link to home, to memory, to ritual. The pilgrims know when they finally return, Their own hearth fires will greet them with familiar smells: herbs, smoke, fish, bread. In a world that changed so quickly through plague, famine, and war, food was one of the few stable threads they could cling to. You look down at the remains of one of their pies and see how rough the crust is, how uneven, how marked with tiny scorches from the oven, and it strikes you, even imperfect things kept people alive. One of the older pilgrims wipes crumbs from his beard, takes a deep breath, and starts singing a hymn. Others join in, their voices raw and unpolished but heartfelt, echoing across the river. The sun starts to sink behind distant hills, painting the sky in bruised colors of plum and gold. And there you stand, a quiet observer, letting their voices wash over you, wrapped in the scent of old herbs and sweet sour fish, the music drifting past like a blessing. You follow the pilgrims as they rise at dawn, their hymn still echoing faintly in your mind, and continue along the winding road. The morning air is crisp, edged with the scent of dew and wood smoke from distant hearths. One by one, they gather their walking sticks, sling their satchels, and march on, eel pies tucked carefully in their packs, a reminder of markets and riverbanks miles behind them. The road grows rougher, climbing over low hills studded with wildflowers and buzzing insects. You hear boots crunching through gravel, the swish of cloaks brushing thorny bushes, and the occasional muttered complaint about blisters. You can practically feel the soreness in their feet, the way their shoulders ache under the weight of the journey. As they crest a hill, a small village appears below, a cluster of timber framed cottages wrapped around a squat stone church. You sense a ripple of relief through the pilgrims. They know another night of shelter is close. You descend with them, dust rising in puffs, and cross into the village where more eels are waiting, in barrels, stacked behind taverns, soaking in brine, ready to become tomorrow's pies. You peek into one of the taverns as the group steps inside, drawn by the promise of warmth and ale. The room is dim, heavy with the mingled scents of beer, damp rushes on the floor, and the unmistakable funk of eel pie fresh from the oven. It's so strong you nearly gag, or at least your modern nose does, but the pilgrims seem overjoyed. They settle around scarred wooden tables, wiping travel dust from their faces, and share the familiar meal. A serving woman bustles around, balancing 3 pies in each hand. Her apron is stained with gravy and a faint smear of ash. You can see the pride on her face as she sets down the pies, slices them with a battered iron knife, and serves them out. These pies are studded with little bits of dried currants, giving off a whiff of sweet among all the salty, fishy richness. It's another reminder that medieval cooks loved throwing sweet and savory together, refusing to separate what modern palates would. One of the pilgrims jokes that if you eat enough eel, you'll grow scales, a silly moment that sparks laughter. Another teases him back, saying he'd be lucky to grow scales instead of growing worms. You nearly laugh yourself, surprised how even in a hard world, humor survived. The tavern's fire burns low, its light catching on metal tankards, polished with years of hands gripping them tight. You watch a boy, no more than 12, sweeping crumbs from the floor quick and silent. He glances around, making sure no one scolds him for missing a spot. Medieval taverns were busy, chaotic places, with an entire ecosystem of labor moving around the guests, from boys like him to kitchen hands stoking the ovens. A dog noses through the rushes under the table, sniffing for stray bites of pie crust. It's mangy, ribs showing, but nobody shoos it away. In a medieval village, dogs were part of the food cycle too. Pest control, alarm system, and maybe even a lucky scrap eater if kids were feeling generous. You watch the pilgrims drop a tiny bit of crust to the dog, who swallows it like a miracle. The talk at the table turns to local rumors. A lord's son gone to war, a sickness spreading in a nearby hamlet, a cow who gave birth to twins. Each voice overlaps the next, forming a quilt of medieval concerns that feels strangely familiar. People worrying about their health, about money, about the state of the world. Sound familiar? The woman behind the bar wipes down tankards, then slips in a small coin to a wooden offering box nailed to the post. That was common too, tiny acts of charity layered into daily routines. Even the smallest village kept up these rituals, a hedge against misfortune. After all, a few pennies to the church might mean safer journeys, or at least fewer nightmares. Over by the hearth, you notice an older man rolling out dough with a heavy wooden pin, his arms as thick as tree branches. He tosses in a pinch of mustard seed, a spice imported at considerable cost, proving even the humblest cook still wanted to impress travelers with bold flavors. The sting of mustard would help cover any faintly sour eel, and medieval diners appreciated that extra bite. It makes you wonder, were these pies good? You try to imagine it. The chewy crust, the fishy sweet filling, the heavy herbs, the unexpected pepper burn. Would you love it? Hate it? Maybe both. But it filled bellies, and that was what counted. A tiny detail catches your eye, a thin iron chain running through the tavern beams overhead, with hooks to hang herbs and onions. Nothing was wasted here. Medieval kitchens dried, smoked, and preserved everything. You see bunches of thyme, a clump of sage, even a string of pungent garlic, all lined up like trophies of survival. As the pilgrims eat, they grow quieter, heads dipping lower, travel-worn bodies relaxing into food and warmth. It's the kind of quiet that comes after a long journey, the sound of safety. And there, in the flicker of firelight, you realize how important these pies truly were. They were a promise. No one goes hungry tonight. Someone raises a toast to St. Peter, patron of fishermen, and mugs clink in a clumsy chorus. Even if you don't share their beliefs, you feel the emotion behind it, gratitude. Eel pies kept people alive, gave them reason to laugh, and pulled them through winters so harsh they might have broken weaker spirits. As the night drags on, the pilgrims begin to drift asleep, some on benches, others curled up near the hearth. You feel the air grow cooler as the fire burns down to gentle embers, the sense of fish and spice mellowing into a quiet blanket of comfort. And if you squint your mind's eye, you can almost see the echoes of every traveler before them, centuries stacked like layers of pastry, all sharing eel pies under the same low beams, telling the same jokes, worrying the same worries, breathing the same prayers.